Imagine putting your 8-year-old daughter to bed, kissing her goodnight, and never seeing her again. It was supposed to be just another normal night, but at 3 a.m., the silence of the house was broken by a noise coming from the girls' room. When Mom got up to check, everything seemed normal. However, it only seemed like it. The next morning, Kirsten Hatfield was missing. The bedroom window was half open, and what they found outside, a blood-stained piece of children's underwear, turned that home into a crime scene. For 18 years, no one knew for sure what happened. A child torn from her own bed, with no witnesses, no concrete clues, until, in 2015, a detail that went unnoticed for almost 2 decades revealed a brutal and unbelievable truth. Who took Kirsten? Why was she never found? And how did a neighbor who was there the whole time go unnoticed? What you are about to hear is one of the most disturbing and mysterious stories in American criminal history. But before I tell you in detail, check if you are already subscribed to the channel so you don't miss the best true crime documentaries. In the small town of Midwest City, Oklahoma, May 13th, 1997, began like any other. The atmosphere was calm, the streets were quiet, and there was no indication that that Tuesday would remain forever, etched in a family's memory. Kirsten Hatfield, an 8-year-old girl, lived with her mother, Shannon, and her younger sister, Faith, who was just 3 years old. Shannon was a single mother, faced difficulties, but did her best to maintain her daughter's routine with love and care. That night, as usual, she put the girls to bed. He kissed each one, closed the door, and went to rest. Around 3 a.m., Shannon woke up to a noise coming from her daughter's room, a subtle, almost insignificant sound. When he went to check, he saw the two apparently sleeping. Nothing seemed out of place. She went back to bed, not knowing that that brief moment of hesitation would change everything. At 6:30 in the morning, the nightmare began. Shannon went to wake Kirsten, but the bed was empty. The bedroom window, which had been closed the night before, was now ajar. Outside, the scene was one of pure horror. Kirsten's underwear was in the backyard, covered in blood. The police were called immediately. A trail of blood on the window suggested that Kirsten had been taken by force. There were no signs of a struggle, no noise, no witnesses. No neighbors heard screams. No suspicious cars were seen. It was as if the girl had been swallowed by the night, in silence. The news spread quickly. A child kidnapped from his own room while he was sleeping. Fear spread throughout the community. Doors began to be locked more tightly. Parents hugged their children more often. But for Shannon, there was no consolation, just a growing emptiness, and a question that echoed without an answer. Who took Kirsten? The scene investigators encountered on the morning of May 13th, 1997, was disturbing. Kirsten's bedroom window was forced shut, and blood stains were visible on both the frame and the sill. On the lawn, near the side of the house, was the girl's underwear, stained with blood. That eliminated any possibility of voluntary escape. He wasn't a child who had snuck out. It was a kidnapping with signs of violence. Little Faith, just 3 years old, was alone in her room when her sister disappeared. In a state of shock, I could barely understand what had happened. Days later, when accompanied by a child psychologist, she managed to say only one sentence: "A bad man took my sister." It was little, but enough to confirm what everyone already feared. Kirsten had been kidnapped while she slept, and Faith had witnessed, or at least noticed, the horror without being able to stop it. Midwest City Police reacted quickly. Search teams were organized immediately. Sniffer dogs searched the neighborhood, wooded areas, and vacant lots. Helicopters flew over the region. Agents knocked on doors, talking to residents, trying to find any clues, any unusual noises, any suspicious movement. But nobody saw anything. No screams were heard, no witnesses. Even so, a woman from the neighborhood went to the police with a curious story. She said her boyfriend had confessed to being involved in Kirsten's disappearance. The statement left investigators on alert, but when checking the man's alibi, frustration set in. He was in a bar that night until 4 in the morning, surrounded by witnesses. The complaint was false. Another line of investigation emerged from Shannon herself. Kirsten's mother had a complicated history with drugs. Some detectives began to hypothesize that the crime could be linked to debts owed to drug dealers or past retaliation. but there was no concrete evidence to that effect, no previous threats, no suspects, and Shannon, desperate, was willing to do anything to find her daughter, including facing her own past. The case began to gain national attention. Television programs covered the disappearance. Flyers with Kirsten's face were posted all over the state, but the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, without any real progress. The silence was deafening, and little by little, the Kirsten Hatfield case was swallowed up by time, but not by her mother. Shannon refused to accept that this would be just another tragedy forgotten in the statistics. She began to study the behavior of criminals, to understand how the penal system works, and became a probation officer in a desperate attempt to perhaps recognize some pattern, some face, some story that connected to her daughters. During this time, several leads emerged, many of them false, like the one in 2014, when a woman found her deceased grandmother's diary, where there was supposedly a confession from her own son about Kirsten's murder. The pages contained graphic and dark details. The police considered the possibility, but after investigation it became clear it was all nothing more than a fabrication, another blow of frustrated hope. In 2015, the Kirsten case completed 18 years. The girl, if she were alive, would be 26 years old. By this point, there were already those who considered that perhaps we would never know what really happened that morning, that perhaps that name would become just one among the thousands of unsolved disappearances in the United States. But fate had other plans, and what was about to be revealed would shock even the most experienced investigators. For nearly 2 decades, the Kirsten Hatfield case remained shrouded in darkness. The police files gathered dust, testimonies have gone cold, and the pain, though silenced, never went away. For Shannon, each of her daughter's birthdays was a cruel reminder of lost time and the silence of the authorities. But in 2015, the fate of the case changed course. A new detective has been assigned to review old files. Daryl Miller, with experience in cold cases, decided to look at the material with different eyes. Instead of moving on to new theories, he went back to basics, to that window, to that blood, to those children's panties found in the backyard. Daryl did what should have been done years ago. He sent the blood samples from the crime scene for further DNA analysis. Technology had evolved dramatically since 1997. With modern testing, it was possible to extract genetic profiles, even from deteriorated traits. The result was surprising. The blood found was not just Kirsten's. There was male DNA mixed in, a complete, unknown profile. For the first time in almost 20 years, there was something concrete in the hands of the police. The genetic profile was immediately entered into CODIS, the FBI's national database. It was the moment Shannon had been waiting for, science finally offering an answer. But the excitement was short-lived. No matches were found. The man behind the DNA had never been arrested, or if he had, he wasn't in the database with a sample on file. He was an unknown. Still, the lead was solid. Daryl Miller then did what many investigators avoid. He went back through the list of everyone who had been interviewed in 1997, one by one, even those who had been quickly discarded. And it was during this sorting that a name came up again: Anthony Palma. He had been interviewed days after the disappearance, just as a formality. He lived on the same street as the Hatfield family, practically across the street from their house. At the time, he said he hadn't seen anything, but that his dog had barked around 3 a.m., the same estimated time Kirsten was abducted. At the time, that detail didn't raise any eyebrows, but now, 18 years later, that same bark sounded like a siren. Miller got a warrant to collect Palma's DNA, and when the lab did the comparison, the doubt was over. The DNA found on the window and Kirsten's clothing was that of Anthony Palma. Miller obtained a warrant to collect Palma's DNA, and when the laboratory made the comparison, the doubt was gone. The DNA found on the window and on Kirsten's clothes was that of Anthony Palma. It was a stunning revelation. The man who had been at the center of the scene since day one had gone unnoticed for nearly 2 decades. Anthony Palma was 56 years old. He worked as a bricklayer and had previously served as a forest ranger. He had a modest criminal history, with nothing that immediately caught his attention, but his record showed suspicious behavior with children at other times, although never proven in court. a pattern that today might have been detected earlier. During the interrogation, Palma tried to remain calm. He said he never entered the Hatfield's house, who only knew Shannon by sight, that he was a good neighbor. But science said otherwise. His blood was on the windowsill. His DNA was on the underwear of a kidnapped and presumably murdered child. His presence at the crime scene was undeniable. Faced with the evidence, Anthony Palma was arrested and formally charged with the murder of Kirsten Hatfield. The trial took place in 2017. Shannon was present at every hearing. She wanted to face the man who destroyed her family. Palma kept his cool. At no point did he confess. He didn't even show any remorse. Anthony Palma was not a stranger. He was the neighbor, the person who walked past the house every day, who knew the family's habits, who, in a cold and calculated way, studied his victim and waited for the right moment to act. He didn't even need to invade an unknown environment. He was at home. When investigators looked deeper into Palma's past, they discovered worrying records, old complaints of inappropriate behavior with minors, informal accusations made by neighbors, but none of them had been followed through. There was a lack of evidence. There was a lack of interest. Perhaps there was a lack of a victim who fit the stereotype that the system considers a priority. At the time of the crime, Palma was questioned, but since he seemed calm, cooperative, and had no relevant criminal record, he was quickly discarded. A fatal mistake. The irony was cruel. The killer was on the original list of suspects. He was interviewed by the police days after the disappearance, and no one, absolutely no one, realized the monster that was there. During the trial, Palma remained impassive. He kept saying he had never entered the Hatfield house, that he had never touched Kirsten, even in the face of indisputable biological evidence. He denied everything. For Shannon, watching this theater of denial was a new kind of torture. It was not enough to have lost her daughter. Now she was facing the man who had destroyed her life, and he refused to even tell her where the body was. This was the point that most outraged the family and the community. The DNA revealed the perpetrator. The courts carried out the sentence, but the girl was never found, and without a body, there was no burial. There were no flowers. There was no headstone, just an empty space in the heart and in the earth. The authorities continued their search. They searched the areas where Palma had been. One detail in particular caught their attention. He had worked for a period as a park ranger, working in remote forested areas, many of which were difficult to access. There were hundreds of places where he could have hidden a body, but Palma never cooperated, and the American justice system cannot force a convicted person to confess. In 2019, the story had a new and unexpected outcome. Palma was found dead in his cell at the Oklahoma Maximum Security Penitentiary. He had been murdered by his own cellmate. The brutality of the crime raised suspicions of revenge. Sex offenders, especially those against children, rarely survive long in prison. Palma's death abruptly ended any possibility of new information. No map, no letter, no clues. He took to his grave the secret that only he knew, and that was what devastated Shannon the most. After so many years of fighting, she had the name of the killer, the conviction, the formal answer. But what mattered most, her daughter's whereabouts, remained unknown. No grave, no goodbyes, no certainty. Justice was served on paper, but a mother's heart is not soothed by sentences. It needs peace, and that, perhaps, she will never have. The Kirsten Hatfield case is remembered to this day as an example of maternal persistence. Shannon never gave up. She turned her pain into fuel, and her dedication ended up being an essential part of keeping her daughter's name alive long enough for the truth to come out. But it is also a grim warning how many other neighbor Palmados are out there, how many silent predators go unnoticed due to flaws in the system, neglect, or superficial judgments. If DNA had not evolved, if the case had been shelved forever, if no one had gone back to the basic details, perhaps today, Anthony Palma would still be walking the streets of Midwest City, passing by the Hatfield house as if nothing had happened. The case of Kirsten Hatfield will never be closed in the hearts of those who loved her. Although the name of her kidnapper and murderer has been revealed, the absence of the body, the answers, the farewell ritual, has left a void that not even time could fill. Shannon, her mother, continues to be a figure of strength and determination. Even after Palma's conviction, she continues to fight, not only for the memory of her daughter, but for other missing children. Her pain has turned into action. Her silence has become an active voice against investigative negligence and the failures of the system. The case also exposed the fragility of the first hours of an investigation. Palma was one of the neighbors. He was interviewed. He gave clues that today seem obvious, but for years he walked free, protected by the very banality of evil, that kind of predator that hides in plain sight. And if you're enjoying the story, subscribe to the channel now so you don't miss the best true crime videos. Kirsten was only 8 years old. She was in her own room, a place where she should have been safer than anywhere else, and it was precisely there that her life was stolen. The idea that danger can be just a few feet away, in the form of someone familiar, is one of the cruelest truths of this case. Still, there is something that remains: the tireless fight of a mother, the science that evolves, the justice that, even if late, arrives, and the warning that echoes. Child disappearances cannot be treated as statistics. Each case is a life, a family, a story interrupted. If this story touched you, consider sharing this video. The more people know about cases like Kirsten's, the greater the pressure for justice and more effective investigative systems. And if you want to follow more stories like this, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. The truth may take time, but it should never be forgotten.